our gender equity panel tonight, just with each beautiful panel member introducing themselves in a couple of sentences. So can we start with Emma?
Hi, my name is Emma Dunch. I'm the Chief Executive of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Is that
my name's Amanda Brown, and I'm a musician and composer, primarily a screen composer, also a writer-director on the APRA board.
I'm Claire Edwards, and I think you know who I am. Percussionist and artistic director of Ensemble, Offspring, and Keychange ambassador.
I'm Nardi Simpson, Uluru Wiringa, Biwidinga, Uluru woman, Sanguina Totem from Northwest New South Wales, storyteller.
I'm Chloe Kim. I'm a drummer, freelance musician most of the time. I've started teaching at the Con drum set course this year, so I'll call myself an educator as well.
I'm Olivia Ansell. I'm Festival Director at the Sydney Festival, newly appointed, so this is my first year coming up. And I was previously a performing artist.
Yay! So, I thought I've got 4 pages of notes, plus everyone needs to talk. So anyway, let's just see how we deviate or what happens. We're filming this so that more people can see it and experience it. And I thought I would start with just a few current and past statistics about gender balance and inclusivity for gender minorities in music, in the music scene. So some of these stats are kind of from different years. So 2019, Billboard 100, 23% of those artists were women or gender minorities. 30% of the average pay gap at major record labels in the UK is the pay gap between men and women. 84% of the members of Keychange on average, CMOs on average are men. And 98% of works performed by global orchestras in 2018-19 season were by men. So you can see that these aren't the most current statistics, of course. We don't really have statistics from last year because last year didn't happen. I think it's definitely getting better, but it's getting better slowly, and the statistics still tell the story that there's a lot of work to be done. So, I'll just tell you what Keychange is before we go on. So Keychange is an initiative out of the UK and the EU, and they're leading discussions on quotas, and they're also a movement that they say they count the discounted. So they take action to empower talented, underrepresented genders with training, mentoring and networking support. And so you can actually make a pledge to Keychange for your organisation. So the ABC could do it, the Sydney Symphony has just done it. Yay. Ensemble Offspring did it, and the 50-50 gender balance pledge can be, for example, for your staff, for your orchestra members, for your programming, for your, whatever. So you can actually choose what your target's going to be for these quotas. And I first heard about Keychange when I went to Classical Next in 2019. And I was asked to present with Paola Prestini from National Sawdust on a gender equity panel there. And I heard about Keychange and thought, this is awesome. All Australian organisations need to join this, because I like the idea of being held to account on an international scale. And at that time, the Proms had just joined and all the big festivals in the UK. And I think, slowly they're making a really big difference. So that's Keychange, and as Keychange ambassador, I don't really have any official role per se. I don't get paid. I just go around talking about it when it's appropriate and when it feels timely, and I guess it means that I can talk to slightly more important people than if I was just Claire Edwards, maybe. So the next sort of starting point for a discussion with our panellists is to just talk about this Catherine Strong quote that I sent everyone when I first asked them to join the panel. And it is, "Women are afforded less symbolic and cultural capital than men, a point illustrated through the systematic devaluation of women as both producers and consumers of music." So I wanted to throw over to Emma and Amanda first off to just ask their views on how do we address gender bias in the Australian music industry at large. That's quite a big question.
Well, being on the board of APRA, we commissioned a study into the representation of women in the screen composing sector, which admittedly is a small slice of this female composing pie. But what we did find out, and this is quite analogous with the proportion of women songwriters of the top one, I think that the top 900 songs from 2012 to last year, which is roughly 12%. So 12% of women writing the most popular successful pop songs in the United States, and 13% of women screen composers here. So it's not great numbers, and it's not really reflective or representational of the numbers of women who are graduating from tertiary music courses, which are roughly 50-50 gender split. So yeah, that's a huge question. But on my mind today is, because I just came from the APRA annual conference, and we had as one of our special guest speakers Bjorn from ABBA, who is, he's the new head of CISAC, which is the big umbrella international organisation of all the CMOs, which are the royalty collection societies for composers and songwriters like APRA. And he was asked by our CEO, Dean, why was Sweden such a successful music nation? Because it's a small nation, it's only a population of 10 million. And he started to say that he thought there were 3 reasons. One of them being modestly that ABBA paved the way, opened the door for a number of really successful high-profile songwriters that followed, from Roxette to Robin to Max Martin, the Uber pop producer. And so that's a role modelling thing, and that's very applicable to women, I think, as composers and in the music industry. The second thing was Sweden, being a small country, had to think about music as an export commodity because the domestic market isn't big enough for sustainable careers in music, and that's arguably a similar situation here. So we really need to be thinking about sending our music out into the wider world and representing. And the third thing was technology. He said that Sweden had always been very au fait with technology, and that was one of the recommendations that came out of the APRA study into women screen composers, that along with mentoring and role modelling and education programs, technology was a really important component, given that so much music these days, it's not written down. Well, it is for the classical genre, but for most other genres it isn't. And it's really important to be on top of that technology, because that's where women are really outnumbered, comprising only 2.6% of music producers. So there's a huge amount of work to do in that space.
And what about you, Emma?
Thank you for those comments. I guess I would say from not a global level, but a smaller, I'd say anyone who has power should use it. Let's start there, right? So if you are, in my case, in a position of power, you absolutely have to use it. You have a responsibility. So how did I do that? And I came here from America after 20 years abroad. So I actually heard about Keychange when I lived in New York with Bella, who's one of my colleagues and friends. And I thought, wow, I'm going back to Australia, and what kind of society will I find there? And then how can I be an agent for positive change? And many of you will be aware, Peggy in particular, who's one of the commissionees, the first thing I did was like a gender pay parity assessment of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, the piece that I'm in control of. You know, are women and men paid fairly equally and equitably across the employee base? A basic thing, but we do it every year. And then, you know, where are the leadership roles in my institution, and are they appropriately and equitably distributed? And then how can our organisation, with its heft, its power and its money, be a force for positive change? And this was the impetus to launch the 50 Fanfares project, which many of you know is one of the biggest music commissioning projects in Australian history. 50 composers commissioned while we're dislocated from the Opera House in preparation for the return, and all paid for through philanthropy, because I went and convinced people to give money so that we could commission women and First Nations and young people. And so out of 50 commissions, 50% of them went to female composers that we searched far and wide to find, including Peggy. 50% of them went to people aged under 40, right? So the next generation, how can the Sydney Symphony be a platform for those people instead of giving the money to the well-known but predictable, no offence to those people, but it's like, how can you use the power for good? And obviously a decent representation of First Nations voices, which would mark the first time the Sydney Symphony had sort of moved in that direction. You know, how do we address this long term? You know, it's like we then appointed Simone Young, as many of you know, of course, the largest orchestra in the world to appoint a woman to lead it. So, you know, the predecessor being Marion Alsop at the Baltimore Symphony, that symphony is half the size of the Sydney Symphony. You know, there no real top 20 economically speaking orchestra in the world has ever appointed a woman and said, we're putting our money with a chick and we're going to make a difference. And, you know, it's Simone Young, of course, so it's a safe bet. But I got a lot of flack, actually, for all of these decisions and for sticking my organisation's neck out in a way that's very un-Australian, is quite aggressive, and hasn't won me that many friends, to be honest. I mean, don't put that on the internet. I would do it the same way again. Christy's laughing. But, you know, if you are going to lead, you need to lead and take the blows along the way. So I'm very proud, and I would do it exactly the same way again. And now the question is, okay, how do we create a continuing pipeline of opportunity for women? And, you know, every time we see inequality and equity, try to do our piece to address it. So my central message is, if you have any power at all in the system, use it.
Yeah, wow, thanks, Emma and Amanda. Well, it is kind of American in a way, isn't it? And I also get criticised for being more like that as well. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about overcoming the subconscious bias. I had a story that I was reminded of from the last panel like this that we did, that I told from 2019, and I just want to tell it again quickly before I throw to Olivia for this one. But you know, that as we all know, there's a traditional bias towards hiring males in creative and leadership positions as opposed to hiring females, and it's existed systematically for hundreds and thousands of years. So this subconscious kind of sexism is a very difficult one to know how to deal with, I think, especially as a female leader. Now, there was this man in Holland called Kees Vladingenbroek, who I knew quite well. He would program at the Concertgebouw. They had this Saturday afternoon series, and he'd actually programmed me playing a concerto. And when I read this article, I just could not believe it. It was after the Proms had programmed, I don't know if they did 50% female in 2019, but they did a very high number. And so he suggests in this article, which is called, he chose to write it for the Volkskrant, which is the main newspaper in Holland. He suggests that identity politics has been imported from the US. He also says that it is often unclear how to determine if there is marginalisation or discrimination in a certain field. He suggests that to program female composers in certain cases, such as at the Proms, instead of the traditional canon, dead white males, is an assault on our heritage. He suggests that a forced replacement of the great masters by female contemporaries or composers with non-European roots will irrevocably lead to destruction of public interest, to empty concert halls, and eventually even their closure. So, I just was so angry when I read that. I was like, how can someone in this day and age actually think that and then say it in an article? So, what do you think about that, Olivia?
Question. No, and unconscious bias is something that was on my mind when Claire first reached out to speak on this panel. She said, look, I know that you're not a musician, you're not a composer, but you are a festival director and formerly a performer. I began my career in dance, and as most dancers do, by the age of 30, you realise you have to hang up the shoes, hang up the bare feet, and pivot and become something else. And in my case, I was an artist and a choreographer. I had a huge interest in being an artistic director, but I thought I would learn the ropes and become a producer. And very quickly, I became an executive producer of a dance company. I remember meeting with fellow executive producers of dance companies around the country, and it was all women. And the artistic director of every one of those dance companies was male. And talk about unconscious bias, I wasn't even conscious of that at the time. And I look back now and think not only of those small to medium dance companies where the artistic director's male, but of the major companies, the ballet companies, the major dance companies, they were all male. And I saw this cycle, and I thought, we're all in this cycle working for the man, and I could see it kind of going on, and I left that role after 4 years and then was approached to go and be the executive producer for more men in artistic directorship positions, or CEO positions and I turned down those roles and consciously thought, I don't want to put myself in that type of dynamic again, because it'll just keep going around in a circle. So I had to make a conscious effort to reposition myself as an artistic director and not work for any company full time, and take on different roles where I would be perceived as an artist or in a position of creative power and influence. And so I chose not to work full time for one organisation, but to work for many. To change that perception. And I think, my previous role with this was Head of Contemporary Performance at Sydney Opera House. And as a programmer, as Emma said, you can be in a position of power to make change, and quotas are important, and we looked at that very deeply in our programming and making sure that we had women in positions of power and creative leisure, and that's certainly a huge focus of mine, Sydney Festival. In fact, women in the arts is a huge pillar in my vision. Something that I noticed during my time at Sydney Opera House, because I was often booking jazz and big band and cabaret, and as always, in would come the musicians, all male. And I'm on staff at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. I'm a lecturer there. I have been for 10 years. I lecture the Con Opera School, and I see young men and young women walking in with cellos and double bass and all these instruments. I see the horn, I see the female horn players. But then in the professional gigs on the stages of Sydney Opera House, all I ever see is male musicians. Different in the symphony, obviously, with classical, but especially in the commercial music world. So where are those female musicians? And you know what? They absolutely exist. And in the last 2 years since the Me Too movement, you look at the Hugh Jackman tour, you look at various big band gigs, musicians in the pits of musicals, from the Hayes to the Capitol Theatre. I'm now seeing all female ensembles, mixed orchestras, and this unconscious bias has finally changed with the music bookers who now are conscious of it, but it's taken this long.
I agree with what you say though, that quotas, while a lot of people might poo-poo them and say, well, we shouldn't need quotas. If the art's good, then it speaks for itself. But you do need quotas when you're trying to make change in a very conscious fashion.
Absolutely, and I'm not seeing, like, Sunday night, another fantastic and well-behaved women with Zara Newman and several other incredible singers that are locally based, and all female ensemble. I'm seeing that now more in the last 12 months than I've seen in the last decade. So it's just a shift that people have made. A bit the same with me working as a producer with all these other women as producers to male artistic directors. We didn't realise it at the time, and There's no way you would stand for that now.
No.
And that was only 10 years ago. So
Yeah, so much has changed even in the last 5 years. It's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. I was watching Brazen Hussies the other night on iView. I don't know if anyone's watched it yet. It's about the women's liberation movement in... Yay! So you know it well.
I wrote the score.
Awesome! It's great, Amanda. So with a score by Amanda Brown. So you should watch it. It's going to be on telly, I think, on Easter Monday, but it's on iView as well. And what really struck me was a comment towards the end that made me think of another comment that I heard on FBI the other day when they were talking about women's rights around all the crap that's happening in politics at the moment. The Oppression Olympics, she called it, and it made me think about this scene in Brazen Hussies where all these basically white women are fighting for women's liberation, and then there are these First Nations women there, and they're saying, you know, why do you think your plight is more important than ours? And you know, they're very direct about it. So this concept of fighting for minorities versus, you know, female representation versus all these oppressed, I guess, kind of parts of our society, or previously oppressed. And I just was wondering, Nardi, if you had any thoughts about that specifically, because I think there's also the privilege thing, you know, you're a privileged white female, but you're still a female, and what does that all mean? And of course, and in the US, especially now, there's a lot of, especially coming out of National Sawdust, cultural minorities in commissioning. And there's a lot of people to look after, and I guess I just want this whole female thing to just be done with. You know, we just want it to be a fact of life and just move on, and so we can worry about the other more important things. But what do you think about that?
There's a cloud that is colonisation. And then women sit in the shadow of marginalisation. And we don't even, you know, the big conversations that I understand for people I'm connected to in my communities, to do with being excluded and ostracised, not getting opportunity, is about us as sovereign people in this country. That's the big funnel we need to tackle. And the difficult thing in talking about this sort of stuff is that in the context of that, women are implicated in black people's marginalisation as well. So it gets sticky and hard.
It does,
and, you know, I only just started a Twitter account. Man, that thing mucks me up so bad. I don't get it because I'm too old for it.
Yeah.
But I look at the young black voices on there, particularly women, and I think these girls are saying things I would actually never think, but I get it. And so from what's going on there, we have generational conversations. We have kind of landscape conversations. The yarn here in Gadigal country about supporting and empowering women is very different to where I'm from. And the difference actually is the thing that we embrace, but it makes it difficult for other people to understand or to work with, you know what I mean? So for us, complexity is the shit.
Yeah.
Because it means you're making space for things that you're not. And the thing that you are actually incorporates a thing that you will never be. And we're okay with that.
Yeah.
So that's why it's hard when we're talking about the concerns of women only as black people, because our men are experiencing the same thing under that cloud.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to go out there and talk about, I want this and I want that, because I've got to say, we need this.
Yeah.
Because I'm always in relationship to that, to mob, men, women, whatever.
Yeah.
And so landscape, generational, going back to Twitter, you know, and I sit there on Twitter and I try and learn. And those young fellas are saying things, like I said, that I would never think. But then I thought, I'm so the opposite of radical. I'm an old fuddy-duddy. I'm learning from these women, saying things and being out there, and, you know, sometimes I think, hey, just, you know, pull back on that a bit.
Yeah.
And then I realised actually that this is a thing that happened. You know, I was talking about my grandmother a while ago. She passed away. She's been gone longer than she was alive for me now. And she used to call every white man boss. And I used to say, man, don't do that. Don't call them that. They don't deserve that. So I was that young radical to her, you know.
Yeah.
And here I am sitting thinking, but I'm not radical enough.
Yeah.
So these different ways, you know, of interacting with these big, overarching things. For us, the more people that can speak, the better. And that makes it hard to say, right, black women need X, Y, and Z, and while you're at it, A, B, and C, and then we'll be right. Because it's not like that. Black women up there need A, B, and C, and black women here want X, Y, and Z, and don't forget about Huey, Dewey, and Louie behind us. And you know what I mean? We are always connected. We can't talk. And you know, on the way coming in, I think, how am I going to talk about this? What am I going to say about this that's going to make any sense? There are also old things that keep us, when I talk about the thing that you're not, and in, you know, Sydney and where I'm from too, matrilineal society, women looked after the water, and they spoke for the water and told you where, you know, when you can drink. That's how fundamental the women's role was. So you need to have a relationship and meaningful interaction with the thing that you're not to survive. And so bring that forward into a feminist kind of context. I am obliged to talk about the people I am not. The larger context is this sort of what is happening under that big cloud up there that we're all not accessing.
Big. And I could listen to you talk all day, and in fact Lamona and I did have a whole 1 hour conversation with Nardi on the first day of NAIDOC week, which you can look up on YouTube if you're interested. But it's just Nardi waxing lyrical for an hour, really. It's beautiful. So to kind of slightly change the subject, I listened to quite a few episodes recently of this Brené Brown podcast called Dare to Lead. I don't know if anyone's listened to it. And I recommend it, but there was a really interesting comment that she made in one of them about, she said there was one time, she's an educator, and there was one time where she asked her class to mark their own assessments for that term. And she said, I'm never going to do that again, because all the women gave themselves like B-, maybe a C. I mean, I could have done better, and all the guys gave themselves A+. And I thought that is so telling in relation to why it is that I've got all these quotes here from, you know, Susanna Eastburn from Sound of Music in the UK saying that she only gets a third of her applications to all their programs from women, same with Hatched Academy, same with, you know, many places. And I wonder, Chloe, if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, it's pretty obvious that, you know, we judge ourselves in a different way to men maybe, and we're harder on ourselves, but what other than making more programs that are just for women, what do you think we can do better?
I think I read this book called Woman and Power by Mary Beard. It's a beautiful little book that talks about history of women being underrepresented. And it said that men get opportunities when they make a mistake, but women tends to not as much. We are a very humble-natured people. Everyone is. but I think the society definitely makes growing people to have certain ideas. So, for an example, when I first went into the Conservatorium of Music, from one of the few only female staff members, I heard, "Aren't you too small and short to be a drummer?"
What does that even mean?
So I thought, this is shocking. I'm 25 years old, and everyone here and in the past have been trying so much to change, and it's still happening, and I'm still experiencing, and I can see my young students going through it still. So definitely the society and the groups needs to be more sensitive. We have been always being sensitive, but this is more important time to be aware, to be caring, and to make programs that encourage women in specific, absolutely, but also to create and encourage young people to, be aware and be kind to their male, female, and other gendered people in general. I think that's really difficult.
Yeah, we're getting there, but there's still a little way.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what the time is, but okay, perfect. So I have this massive list of solutions that I've sort of collated. I love how I called it solutions. I mean, it's not really solutions, it's examples of things that we can all do. So I'm going to say a few of them, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleagues to see if they have any other thoughts for positive steps, like what Chloe just said. So one great thing I saw recently, which many of you probably also saw on Facebook, was Lisa Lim and Brie Van Ryck and a group of women at the con created, well, they didn't create it, but they made happen, the creation of a bust of Deborah Cheetham to be put in the con library next to Beethoven and Bach and blah, blah, blah. And I called Brie yesterday because she was very, she was very sort of major in the instigation of this. And I just said, you know, how did that work and how did that feel, pushing that much? Like, did you have to push? And she said, well, you know, it definitely was a form of activism. I'm not really on staff at the con, so that probably afforded me this opportunity to really do that activism. But she said, we just had to do it. We didn't wait for anyone's permission. We didn't really ask. We raised the money. We did the, you know, unveiling, and we put it there. And it was, and I thought, yeah, that's what we have to do. And then with a hilarious conversation ensued on Facebook with my friend Amanda Cole, who's a composer, and she said, Claire, my mum does, you know, clay modelling. Maybe I can go to her studio and make one of you, and and stick it in the con library. I mean, it might not look like you, but. And Brie said, yeah, we should, let's all do it all around the world. Just like bomb libraries with busts of female composers. I thought, like that sort of thing would really get traction to say, this is not enough. We're not just, you know, taking our hats off to this tradition. We're paving the way for a new tradition. So that was one form of activism. Another thing that Brie and I were talking about yesterday was that they did this call to arms with Opera Australia a couple of years ago, and there was this petition that we all signed, and that again was Lisa and Brie and Peggy. Where is Peggy? Oh, there. Leading the way, and so that felt like a really sort of big thing, and you know, it's sort of, I don't know really if it did that much, but when Bluebeard's Castle was programmed and the production was sort of hammered a bit for not really, for doing all the things that we were saying in the letter shouldn't be done in opera, I wrote to this group of women again and I said, you know, what are we going to do? And Lisa basically responded and said, I'm really tired, I'm exhausted, I need a break, I can't fight this one, Claire. And Brie sort of, I think we're all in the same boat where we're very tired, we've been fighting the fight, you know, you've got to choose your battles. And Bree said, I wish I'd had the time and energy then to go to all the men on that list who signed that petition and say, it's your turn now. Like, you fight this fight. Why do we have to do it all the time? We don't have to do it. You've got permission. We don't have to even give you permission. You just do it. So, you know, this idea that everyone has to be involved in this fight, and that way it will go much quicker if it's not just the select few sort of fighting the fight all the time. I don't know if anyone has anything.
I wanted to talk to the larger issue that you were talking about there, is that a couple of years ago there was a very similar thing to this with Gloria Steinem when she came to Australia, and there was a women's circle. And the women who were speaking to this, it was basically only women in the audience, probably about 200. And she had really interesting things to say, but the most interesting woman to stand up was the remarkable Senator Gadigal, who of course said, yes, of course we're going to be banging our heads against walls forever, because the men have to be able to step aside to some degree, because otherwise it can't happen, and they weren't. She was talking about power, exactly as you're talking about, in our federal government, which, as we know, is more heinous than it's been for a very long time, or exposed to be the heinous that it is. But her issue, and Eva Cox was saying exactly the same thing there too, is of course that it's not, this journey is for all of us, is that our world will be better when we realise that if women are allowed and enabled and facilitated to do things we can do, everybody benefits.
Yeah.
The whole society benefits, everybody benefits. And my little part of that is to bring up fiercely feminist sons. And they know, and fight the good fight, because they know that we will all benefit. So one of the big issues, I still think, is to be pressing home that individual men may not benefit when powerful women take up those positions, but that as a community and a society we all do. And I think that's where we have to be able to say all the time, we have to be able to push this message home that it's not, you know, the disgusting way that Scott Morrison says it is, oh, you know, but we can't have women doing that in case it disadvantages men. It's like, no, that's not the point. That is not the point. And he refuses to get it. And so I also think now it's incumbent upon all of us to constantly be reiterating that message. Is that our whole community and our whole society benefits when all of us are seen as equals, regardless of what our gender is.
Yeah, and that's exactly the same in music programming. Yeah. There's diverse composers, there's diverse narratives, there's diverse stories. Yes, Jim?
In my, I program a program on Fine Music Radio of new music, and I've consciously put an equal number of women composers as men in that program, and it just makes it more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't go out there and say I'm doing it.
No.
I just say, well, this is more interesting, and this is actually, the program's called New Horizons. It's about the music of today and the composers of today, and that the world of the composers of today is one where women are an extremely important voice.
I think it's a societal reflection on Australia versus other places. That when I came back here, I think this is a very conservative, misogynistic society in Australia. And I thought, well, I'm not going to get permission from anyone, right? And I would say to everybody, don't wait for someone to give you permission, which is the point you just made, right? 9 out of 10 people will not be brave enough to stick out their neck and try to make a difference or change something. It's not the society that we have in this country. It's, you know, comply, follow the rules, stay in the lane, and don't try and change the system. The system is powerful, and you know, it's not for you to say it should be different or better. So I would just say, on a personal note, like, don't wait for permission, be brave, and don't wait for someone to lead the way. That's what you have to do, and then people will follow. But don't wait to follow someone else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just mention, in a jazz community that I am heavily collective in is also very male dominated, and even nowadays there will be incidents where it's an event, maybe 3 sets, 30 people performing, and a lot of the time I would be the only female, and they celebrate for having a female musician. And then I call it that activism thing that we've been talking about. I say, no, we need more. This is not, I'm the only one. No. Calling it is important, I believe. And
it's going to be awkward. And it has to be awkward.
Yes.
Otherwise, I mean, these marches in the city, they're awkward too. We've got to do it.
Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that. Yeah.
Olivia, do you have anything to say before we wrap up? I've got to pack up my marimba in a sec.
Of course. Just a quick thing, again, looking back, you look at opera directors like Lindy Hume, who actually was the first female Sydney Festival director. And the festival's been running nearly 44 years, and I'm the second ever female director in 44 years. Both red heads behind the flag. But I look back at Lindy's career as an opera director, I look at Simone Young, and previously when she was in Australia, I look at Lindy's tenure previously, before she became Sydney Festival Director, working with Opera Australia, and of course she went to Opera Queensland, but how difficult it was for them then, and I don't think I realised, I look back at women in the, in the 70s, the 80s and 90s, 2000s in positions of creative power or leadership and think how formidable, I didn't realise it must have been so tough. And I feel really grateful now to be in this role at a time when women are accepted. But I've spoken to Lindy many a time since being appointed, and it was difficult. It was difficult for her being a female festival director. Even that was only back, at 2009, 10, 11. So we've come a long way. We've got a lot further to go.
Yeah. Nardi, do you have anything to say to wrap up? And then Amanda can have the final words.
No.
Or we can do it the other way around.
I understand blackfellas, we do things differently. Square, peg, round, hole, all that stuff, that's us. But women are the same. We work differently. And there's a lot to be said in following or creating a path that looks different. Because we're really good at it. Blackfellas are good at doing it. And women are really good at working in different ways. That's our strength. And that's what I would love to see come after me from black women. Things that we've never seen before but feel the right way because we're working in ways that are right for us, and that's when it benefits everyone. Not when we're trying to do what the fellas have been doing, because that's not interesting to us.
No.
Most of the time. And that takes even more bravery because the path actually isn't there. But perhaps it is.
There's no way I can be as profound as Nardi. But on the path, the subject of the path, I think that it's important for the younger generation, and what you, Claire, were saying earlier about the absence of women on AMEB syllabus. If there isn't a path made by someone, then the idea to follow that path doesn't occur to people, and that's a common theory in feminist rhetoric. You can't be what you can't see, but it's true. We really need to see more of those different paths, different approaches, and so small rebellious acts, no matter how quiet or on the grand scale of change they are, just sneaking in women to the AMEB syllabus, furtively programming them in major concert halls. If we can get away with just changing things in our own way, I think that will be the way forward for the younger generation.
Thank you, and thank you everyone. This has been a real pleasure and uplifting.